the air itself, carries the memory of history. Today, we're going to explore what happens when a state attempts not just to rewrite history on paper, but to violently erase the very sound of the past. We are embarking on a really profound PhD-level investigation into the Soviet Union's war against its own spiritual heritage.
Yeah.
Specifically, the systematic destruction of Russia's consecrated bells during the height of the anti-religious campaign, a period we're calling the Great Erasure.
It's more than just history. It's like an acoustic autopsy. We're analyzing a staggering act of cultural violence.
Right.
And it was primarily concentrated between, say, 1928 and 1941. And just to frame the scale for you, it's almost unbelievable. The Orthodox Church was, it was annihilated.
Annihilated is the right word.
The number of functioning churches just plummeted from almost 30,000, 29,584 to be exact, down to fewer than 500.
Wow.
We're talking about a 98.3% systematic elimination of the entire spiritual infrastructure. It's a staggering figure.
And if the architecture was targeted, so were the people who upheld the faith. The sources are just. They're so clear on the sheer human tragedy.
They really are.
In 1937 alone, over 85,000 Orthodox priests were shot. But while we tend to focus, and rightly so, on the physical destruction, the churches, the lives of our mission today is to analyze the deliberate removal of the soundscape of faith. We are going to define and really dissect this concept of acoustic iconoclasm.
And that's such a crucial term because, iconoclasm traditionally means the destruction of images or idols, and the Soviets, they were masters of that. But the acoustic aspect is so often overlooked.
It really is.
We have to understand that for centuries, Russian bells that weren't seen as inert musical instruments or, simple timepieces. They were seen to possess profound spiritual agency.
They were considered living sacred entities.
Exactly. Whose silencing was a huge ideological rupture, a cutting off of the community from the divine.
And this is the crucial leap in understanding for you, for the modern listener.
Yeah.
We have to move past seeing a bell as just a heavy piece of cast metal.
Right.
And start seeing it through the eyes of the believer, a living icon with a soul and a voice. So let's unpack that, this concept of spiritual agency. Where does it start?
It starts with the ritual that imbued them with life. The creation of a bell was not industrial, it was sacramental.
Sacramental.
The metallurgy, that was the physical body. But the ritual of bell baptism, that was the granting of the soul. It directly mirrored the baptism of a human being.
Thus, it wasn't a metaphor, it was literal.
It was, and it granted the bronze its divine purpose.
Tell us about the specifics of that ritual. How detailed was this process of christening a metal object?
It was incredibly intricate and very formalized. It all emphasized purification and consecration. So first, the bell was ritually washed with blessed water and salt.
Liquid water and salt.
And the salt in this context, it wasn't just for cleansing. It was thought to make the bell demon-proof.
Demon-proof.
Yeah. It was preparing it for its lifelong battle against spiritual contamination.
So it's a kind of spiritual armor forged right there in water and salt, preparing the metal for sonic warfare.
Precisely. And following the washing came the anointing. The priest would apply sacred oil in the side of the cross. While reciting the Latin consecration, which is a really powertical formula, Sanctificator et consecrator, Domine, signem istud in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.
And that was the moment.
That was the moment the bell officially received its name, dedicated to a specific saint. It became christened metal, a full spiritual creation.
So it gained a name, a protective barrier, and a dedication. It was.
Yeah.
Was incorporated into the divine hierarchy.
Yes.
This shift is, it's beautifully captured in that Lithuanian belief cited in the sources.
Oh, that's a fascinating one.
That a newly cast church bell was said to emit absolutely no sound. It was literally born mute until it had gone through that full ceremony of consecration and baptism.
Right. The sound wasn't a mechanical output. It was the manifestation of the divine voice actually entering the object.
It's incredible.
And that conviction in their vitality, it links directly to their spiritual duty, which was to provide what we call etheric protection.
Right. Protection.
Once consecrated, the bell was instantly viewed as the most dreaded enemy of evil spirits.
The sources offer such a vivid description of this spiritual counterattack. I love those old English writings. They note that evil spirits doubt mush when they hear the bells rung. And the ringing wasn't just celebratory, it was confrontational.
It was sonic defense, absolutely. And this is the deep fundamental reason behind the ancient and, persistent custom of ringing bells during atmospheric crises.
Like thunderstorms.
Specifically during thunderstorms, or as the text says, when groat tempest and rages of weather happen.
Right.
The aim was explicitly to abash the fiends and witched spirits who were believed to ride the air currents and cause all this destructive weather.
This moves so far beyond simple pagan appeasement. It's a form of active spiritual technology.
That's a great way to put it.
The sound created an etheric shield, a consecrated sonic barrier against airborne evil. And we see this belief, it holds on for a long, long time.
Well into the modern era, the sources mention it was documented as late as 1852 in Malta. The bishop there ordered bells rung for a full hour to allay a severe gale.
A full hour.
The conviction was real, it was immediate, and it was geographically widespread. You see it from France to Malta to Russia.
So the sound itself was understood to be the physical manifestation of divine authority.
Operating within the material world, yes. But the belief in their consciousness, it went even further. They were attributed with true agency, their own will.
And the mythology of sentience surrounding these massive bronze artifacts is just, it's captivating. How do the sources illustrate this consciousness?
Well, there are these fascinating anecdotes of bells just refusing to comply with human demands. Think of the legend of King Clotaire II. He was so impressed with a bell at Sens that he tried to steal it, essentially. Move it to Paris. The bell, however, was so distressed at being removed from its home and its community that it simply turned completely dumb on the road. It refused to function for its new, unwelcome master.
That is an active refusal. It's an acoustic strike, basically.
It is.
It chose silence over servitude. And this belief persisted, right? That bells, once they were removed, they physically wanted to return to their spiritual birthplace.
Yes, exactly. The tradition stated that unless removed bells were securely tied with chains and ropes, they would attempt nightly journeys back to their old homes.
Wow.
Imagine the physical and psychological effort required to restrain this enormous, sanctified object, treating it like a conscious, heavy animal desperate to escape.
The sheer volume of material needed to restrain a bell, it just speaks to the profound belief in its autonomy. And this agency, it was often seen as divine guidance.
Right.
The Celtic bell lore, for instance, provides a perfect example of the bell acting as a true oracle.
St. Keenan, yeah. He was searching for the ideal location for his new monastery.
And the journey wasn't dictated by geography or human convenience.
No, not at all. The traveling monks simply had to continue until St. Keenan's bell rang of its own accord.
Of its own accord.
It acted as a kind of divine compass, autonomously signaling the exact spot on the river fall where the convent was to be founded.
That is profound. The destination wasn't chosen by human planning or engineering, but by the bell's spontaneous sacred signal. And if we bring it back to Russia and the fate of the deceased, the bell's voice wasn't just a sign of mourning, was it?
No, not at all. The Lithuanian poetical belief, it clarifies this connection between the acoustic realm and the divine realm perfectly. It says the souls of the deceased are floated into heaven on the sounds of baptized bells.
Floated into heaven.
The sound was literally a vehicle for the spirit, a sonic lift into eternity.
So when a militantly atheist regime silences that voice,
they are not just stopping a sound. They are consciously severing the most fundamental link between living, the dead, and the divine.
This realization, it changes the entire framing of the Soviet campaign. I mean, the Bolshevik state, being these ideological enemies of the spirit, they knew they were attacking something far more significant than scrap metal or architecture.
They had to. They were fighting the active, living soul embedded in the bronze and the spiritual infrastructure that defined the Russian world. The intensity of their violence, it corresponds directly to the perceived power of the object they were trying to annihilate.
Which naturally leads us right into part 2 and diving into the material essence of this living icon, the alchemy of alloy.
Right. The very composition of the metal was steeped in spiritual significance and this pursuit of a perfect resonant voice.
So the traditional metallurgy involved a mixture of copper and tin, the basics of bronze.
Pretty standard.
But the pursuit of that magnificent singular tone seems to have invited an almost magical or alchemical addition to the mix.
It absolutely did. Bell founders sought perfection, and the belief was that the metal itself had to be spiritually refined. This is all encapsulated in that legendary story of Tancho.
The knave bell maker.
The knave bell maker, commissioned by Charlemagne.
And Tancho's promise was spectacular. A bell so perfect that its tone would render all others mute. It's an almost megalomaniacal goal.
It is. It's quite a promise. And he claimed he would achieve this technical marvel through a process of purification. He would purify the copper by fire, a classic alchemical cleansing process.
Right.
And then critically, he would add a massive quantity of silver, about 100 pounds of it, instead of the traditional tin. This was the ideological magic trick.
The replacement of utilitarian tin with sacred silver. And even though Tancho, being a knave, supposedly hoarded the silver for himself,
Right.
the anecdote itself confirms this deep-seated cultural perception that adding a precious non-base metal, purified by fire, fundamentally transformed the mundane alloy into a refined sacred vessel.
It elevates the whole process from just metallurgy to spiritual alchemy. The fire isn't just for melting, it's for transmutation. The silver isn't just for alloy structure. It is an infusion of spiritual purity and material wealth right into the object's soul.
So the quality of the sound became inextricably linked to the piety of the donor.
Yes.
And this piety wasn't just royal, it was communal. It made the bell a physical repository of collective devotion.
And you see this worldwide. In Japan, in Holstein, the traditions involve people literally contributing gold, silver hairpins, coins, right into the melting mass.
So it's a direct merging of personal wealth and piety into the metal's identity.
It was. And they believed that the silver genuinely improved the sound. But more importantly, it meant that a piece of the community's soul and their material sacrifice was permanently woven into the body of the bronze.
The sources provide that phenomenal example of St. Isaac's Great Bell in Leningrad. It wasn't alloyed with specially mined silver.
No, it was made of worn-out and reclaimed coins.
It's the literal transmutation of common currency, the material symbol of daily secular life, into this massive, sanctified religious icon.
When you realize the bell represents the concentrated material manifestation of a community's collective spiritual investment over centuries. I mean, the act of its destruction takes on a magnitude that's so far beyond just property damage.
And the resulting sound of that purified alloy was the central rhythmic pulse of the community. It wasn't just calling people to worship.
No.
It was the ultimate, undisputed civic timekeeper.
It regulated nearly every aspect of pre-industrial life. The bells marked curfew, a critical signal for fire safety and for the official start of bedtime. They announced the opening and closing of city gates.
The regulated commerce.
A fair bell, right, signaling the official start of bargaining.
And the death knell itself was this nuanced language, a precise announcement of loss.
It was. The number of strikes informed the community of the deceased identity. 3 strikes for a child, twice 3 for a woman, and 3 times 3 for a man.
An audible ID card for the soul leaving the community.
That's a good way to think of it. And even civic emergencies relied on their voice. We have the example of the 8-ton Holy Ghost Bell of Strasbourg.
It possessed such authority.
It did. It only rang when 2 separate fires were seen simultaneously. The bell's voice carried this implicit trust and communal authority.
And beyond regulation and warning, we have to remember its musical role. The carillon, in particular, was praised by experts as the finest musical instrument in existence for educating the people and cultivating their love for folk songs.
It was the public radio.
Yeah, the shared cultural soundtrack that defined the town square.
The pervasive influence of this sound on the communal psyche, you just can't overstate it. I mean, consider the profound emotional resonance they carried, which is perfectly illustrated by that famous anecdote involving Napoleon.
The conqueror of Austerlitz, a man known for his cold, unblinking assessment of massive human sacrifice. What did the bells do to him?
The story is just, it's so striking. Near Austerlitz, he's surrounded by devastation, thousands of dead and dying men, and he's unmoved. But when the evening bells from a neighboring town began to chime, he paused his imperial procession, dismounted his horse, sat down on an old tree stump, and he wept.
He wept.
The source records that in that moment, he was no longer the world conqueror. He recalled himself as an innocent, happy boy in Brienne.
So this simple rhythmic sound of the bells stirred the inmost depths of the soul. It overrode the conqueror's monumental will. That is the depth of connection, the access to foundational memory and spiritual feeling that the Bolshevik state was actively seeking to sever.
Yes, they had to destroy not just the object, but the mechanism that stirred thoughts toward non-material, transcendent matters.
Which brings us right to the core ideological act, the Great Erasure and the ultimate profane reversal enacted by the Soviets, what we're calling the reverse alchemy.
This was a calculated, state-directed campaign of physical and acoustic liquidation.
And the destruction of the physical infrastructure was just overwhelming, as we noted.
The records of the repression are chillingly clear. The mass arrest and execution of clergy were continuous. The closure of monasteries was systematic. The Politburo formally adopted a plan in 1928 aimed at eliminating monasticism entirely.
Which was followed by an aggressive, near-complete annihilation campaign by 1932.
Yes, and yet at the same time, the state had to maintain this lie for international consumption. They claimed these church closures reflected a voluntary decline in religion among the working class.
Which the sources immediately contradict.
Immediately, we find cases where thousands of believers bravely petitioned the government, risking their lives, to reopen churches that had been unilaterally shut down.
So the demand for the spiritual voice was still there.
It was still there, but the state was just drowning it out.
The goal was absolute state-mandated silence. But the most profound ideological move was what they did with the confiscated bells. This is where the concept of reverse alchemy really clarifies the political message.
Historically, conquerors understood the political power of the bell. The maxim was well understood. He who commanded the bell commanded the town.
So when a victor melted down a bell, it was often for cannon.
Often for cannon, a literal transformation of the sacred voice into an instrument of destruction and political dominance.
We even see that historical precedent in the secular violence of the French Revolution, that colossal 18-ton Ambroise bell at Rouen.
Converted into cannon in 1793, the symbolic weight of turning a spiritual voice into a military weapon is it's immense.
But the Soviet act was fundamentally different, wasn't it?
It was, because they were operating under a fierce, materialist, Marxist ideology. So the conversion of the bells became the ultimate profane act. They took a baptized, consecrated, named entity, a living icon, intended to guide souls and ward off evil, and they subjected it to a profound, violent metallurgical reversal.
The alloy of devotion, purified by fire, infused with communal piety, was violently stripped of its sacred history.
It was melted down not just into new bells or even military cannon, but into raw industrial metal, scrap for the state's functional machinery.
This is the reverse alchemy.
This is it. It's the forced execution of the living icon. If the baptism conferred a soul, the melting pot performed a spiritual repudiation.
Right.
The bronze was reduced to its base components, intended for tractors, for factory parts, or other secular instruments, utterly repudiating the spiritual agency we were talking about earlier.
The ideological message is crystalline. The voice of God is now material for the 5-year plan.
Yes.
The sacred vessel is stripped of its transcendence and becomes mere utilitarian machinery. It's an affirmation of Marxist anti-spiritual dominance over the very soul of the former Russian world.
The old world spiritual infrastructure was liquidated and recycled entirely into the material functional foundation of the Soviet state.
And the immediate effect of this liquidation was the transformation of the everyday soundscape, the acoustic environment that structured life.
It went from one of rhythm, memory, and spiritual harmony to one of pure dissonance and functional control.
Let's linger on that contrast.
Yeah.
What did the traditional soundscape sound like? I mean, the rhythm was constant, it was comforting.
Right.
Longfellow, describing the carillons of Bruges, wrote of their beautiful wild chimes blending most agreeably with the normal bustle of market activity.
It was an organic, rhythmic sound that told tales of olden times and anchored the community. It connected the individual to the historical past, to the eternal, and to their immediate neighbors.
Now contrast that with the intentional acoustic shift implemented by the Soviet state.
It's a stark contrast.
The ancient sounds, the soulful knell, the comforting angelus, the nuanced warnings, they were systematically replaced by signals that demanded immediate materialist obedience.
You see the rise of the shrieking whistle of fire alarms or just the general cacophony of noisy industrializing cities.
The gentle, soulful knell that measured life and guided prayer was replaced by the functional signal.
The factory whistle demanding labor adherence to the production schedule. The train bell announcing the movement of state goods. The foghorn guiding commerce. These are purely functional, materialist announcements.
The shift is from the metaphysical to the mechanical.
Completely.
It's the replacement of the spiritual herald. Confucius, in that beautiful metaphor, he wished to be a wooden-tongued bell of heaven, a herald to proclaim divine purposes. That profound aspiration is just brutally contradicted by a soundscape controlled entirely by the state. The voice of heaven is replaced by the voice of the Politburo, demanding production and denying contemplation.
And the most profound consequence of this systematic, total erasure, this destruction of acoustic heritage, is the resulting cultural vacuum and the disruption of historical memory.
When the sonic anchor of 1,000 years is removed, the collective memory suffers a radical rupture. The bell, as the source states, was the voice of the past.
It told 1,000 tales.
Exactly. And without that voice, those tales become inaccessible. They become unspoken.
And the figures are just devastating. Nearly 99% of churches gone, the vast majority of priests liquidated, the sound silenced. This leaves a profound sense of historical displacement.
For communities that measured every aspect of life, death, and time by that sound, the landscape suddenly feels alien, empty.
It's a psychological phenomenon. When memory is brutally erased and the state declares the history you know to be fictional or, merely the oppression of the past, the trauma manifests as this deep yearning for an explanation for the profound historical discontinuity.
And this yearning is beautifully, if sadly, reflected in older European bell legends that speak to a lost, inaccessible past.
The myths of sunken bells or disappearing cathedrals, they emerge even before the Soviet era, symbolizing a deep loss.
The image is so potent. Think of Debussy's composition, The Disappearing Cathedral.
Right.
Or that tradition in the Nottinghamshire Valley where people gathered on Christmas Day, believing they could still hear the faint, muffled ringing of bells that had been swallowed entirely by an earthquake.
Faintly resonating from deep within the earth. These legends are a testament to an epoch that communities feel deeply, a profound, lost, or buried past, but can no longer physically locate or hear in their daily lives.
The Soviet campaign didn't just bury the bells. It attempted to bury the entire acoustic epoch and the spiritual conviction it carried.
It did.
And here is where we connect this academic deep dive to the present moment. This is that specific negative insight you won't find on a casual search. When a state successfully executes a total systematic removal of material and acoustic markers,
creating a historical void of this magnitude.
it generates the perfect conditions for the emergence of alternative explanations.
Exactly. When the official state narrative fails to logically account for the radical discontinuity, the sudden break between a monumental, rich past and a functional, impoverished present, the collective consciousness searches for an unofficial history.
Right.
This void, this sense of historical displacement left by such violent iconoclasm, it naturally breeds whispers of massive, forgotten events.
This is the psychological genesis of modern alternative narratives, like the Tartarian theories.
Yes. They attempt to explain why history seems broken, why there's evidence of a sophisticated, monumental past that seems utterly unrelated to the present reality.
The total silence where the sound of the past should be, it naturally demands an explanation for the missing civilization.
The silencing of a shared rhythm creates a deep psychological disassociation. When nearly 99% of your spiritual landmarks are gone, and the ancient sounds that measured life are replaced by industrial schedules, it leaves communities culturally unmoored. They're searching for roots in a landscape that's been deliberately emptied by state violence.
And that brings us to our synthesis. This deep dive into acoustic iconoclasm reveals that the Soviet war on bells was. It was far more than a mere anti-capitalist confiscation of valuable metal.
Oh, much more.
It was a calculated, profound attack on the spiritual infrastructure of a society that revered these bells as living, consecrated entities.
And the forced metallurgical reversal, the reverse alchemy, from sacred baptized alloy to raw industrial material, was the ultimate statement of Marxist ideological power over spiritual life.
They were seizing the soul of the community,
violently executing it in the melting pot, and recycling the memory of devotion into the functional body of the totalitarian state.
So what does this analysis of a historical event mean for you, the listener, today? We often measure cultural trauma by destroyed temples or lost manuscripts. But what is the lasting, unspoken psychological burden on a population when the voice of its past, the sacred rhythm of its entire life, is suddenly and violently silenced?
It creates a silence that echoes, a phantom sound haunting the vast, empty space where the bells once rang. It forces us to ask, what foundational elements of our collective memory are being systematically dismantled today? And what void will that create for future generations to fill?
We encourage you to listen closely to the everyday soundscape around you. Reflect on whether the dominant noise in your world, be it the ringing of notifications, the digital alerts, the blare of advertisements, or the rhythmic demands of commerce, is calling you to contemplation, community, or control.
Yeah.
Because that shift in sound, that controlled dissonance, is often the most subtle yet most effective sign of an ideological shift in power, and the precursor to historical erasure.
The modern world is noisy, but what is missing in the noise? What phantom sounds, what unspoken memories continue to haunt the empty spaces left by the destruction of the acoustic past? What are the modern-day baptized bells in your life, and who, materially or ideologically, is trying to melt them down into raw function?
That is a deep and provocative thought to end on.
One worth mulling over long after this deep dive concludes.
A question that resonates across time. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into acoustic iconoclasm and the reverse alchemy of Russia's bells. We'll see you next time.